I was terrified. Dark night, some farmer's barn, and there was this crowd of guys, really big guns, also small, many wearing balaclavas. And I decided to crack a joke. And I said, look, I want to tell you that it really is possible at times when we move from illegality to legality, from arms, which we had to all take up at a certain point when it was impossible to make change without armed struggle. And I said to them, for the last 30 years, I've slept with an AK-47 under my bed more times than I shared the bed with my wife. And that kind of did a little bit of them listening to this character. So there's that question of adaptability and moving between two worlds, sometimes in that rather grey world of legal, illegal, other times when it's just full-on legal, and other times when it comes to transition. Well, just in terms of the time, and I want to be a bit disciplined here.
No, you're...
Not that she wasn't, she was really good. But when we were talking, and I said to you, look, I don't want to have to duplicate what others are saying, and they're going to say a lot on the legal, illegal. So I just want to point to three particular ways in South African struggle history. The ANC, in a period where there was ostensible legality, just like the Israeli issue of a democracy, democracy for Jews only, democracy for whites only. But the law was really sewn up from the time of Dutch to British rule, and then from the time of the Union, so Dominion status, which we're going to hear more about. We called it Union. And the Crown still had certain powers which the locals didn't have, like declaration of war, which happened when Smuts declared war on Germany to be part of the British alliance. But the ANC had to challenge the regime by defiance, and the defiance took the part of deliberately breaking the basic apartheid laws. Blacks use that entrance to the station, use those lavatories, those queues, those garden benches in the parks, etc., and so on. And the movement challenged that. At first, they were faced with 6 months imprisonment, and the struggle mobilized around that until the regime made the minimum sentence 5 years. And so those laws were challenged in that way until we got to the point where there was no other way but to take up the gun. So this was something about how we had to navigate through the laws from the past to present, where the breaking of all the laws and the passing of power politically has led to democratic South Africa. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Ronnie. Thanks a million. Yeah, that was really, really interesting. Okay, so next we have Robbie. Am I right? Okay. Okay, so Robbie is a researcher, writer, and activist. He wrote a book called Ireland, Colonialism, and the Unfinished Revolution, which I think I saw at the back there. I really like that book because it complicates Ireland as a victim of colonialism only, but looks at that murky space where, you know, what does it mean if there's an unfinished revolution, or if Irish diasporas are involved in making, you know, America or other settler colonies, and I think that goes to what Rania was saying earlier about fragmentation and the limits working within a fragmented system creates, and what Rania made a similar point about you can only work within a law to a degree, and so it's a really great book. He's also so he's an Irish Protestant. And as a Jewish anti-Zionist, I relate to, it's a niche position. So he's written critically about his own community and their role in Irish politics and history, including "No one likes us, we don't care, what it is to be undone," about Ulster Protestant identity in the contested identities of Ulster Protestants. And he's written a lot about human rights and racism and so forth. Okay, so without further ado, if we could please give Robbie a round of applause.
Thank you so much, Sonia. I should start by saying we were in New York actually after October 7th, and it was a very strange time to be there because we knew that something terrible, horrible was coming, but nothing was happening at that time, and it was almost impossible to hear any context, let alone any oppositional voice. And the only thing that was getting through was Jews for Palestine. It was really striking that was the case. So I'm really proud to be here in solidarity. I'm sure there's somebody from that chapter here today, so I'm really proud to be here in solidarity with you, and I think that that moment answered for me the question that was asked this morning, as why is there a need for specific Jewish work on this issue. It was really, really important at the time. So I suppose we always start in Ireland with speaking Irish, and I think Sue's done that for us. So I really only want to give you one phrase just to kind of frame what I want to say, and that's the Irish phrase "an gorta mór," which we use for the thing that's quite often called the famine, or even worse, the potato famine. Of course, it wasn't a famine at all. There was enough food in Ireland between 1845 and 1851 to feed everybody. Nobody had to die. So the starvation was a consequence of colonial policy at that time. But it's interesting that we're meeting in Tala, and the word Tala in Irish means a burial ground or a plague burial ground. So there's very likely to be an immediate reference between an gorta mór and the naming of Tala. So we sit on a lot of history here, and it's important that we recognise that. The other thing I wanted to get in the start, because I do ramble on and I'll run over time, but it's really important to make this point, I think, is that if there's one message I want you to take away from me today, it's the words of Terence MacSwiney. Terence MacSwiney was an Irish politician, a Sinn Féin TD, member of the Dáil, who died on hunger strike in Brixton Prison in 1920. And his words have come back to frame my response to the genocide over the last couple of years, because there's been moments when it just seems so hopeless and desperate, and you think we've been marching, we've been campaigning, and kind of nothing has changed. But MacSwiney said, it's not those who can inflict the most, but those who can suffer most who will prevail in the end. And it's not and I want to emphasize that I don't think he said that in a trite way. I don't think he was unaware of the implications of what the suffering meant. Of course he wasn't, because he went on to die on hunger strike. He knew what that involved, and he said, my death will do more to dismantle the British Empire than my living. So he knew what the sacrifice was. But he is also saying that the sacrifice, the broader sacrifice of a colonized people, is one of suffering as well. As we know, the babies and children in Gaza and Palestine are not making a choice to be involved in struggle. They're just part of it. But that notion that it's those who can suffer more who will prevail in the end is really, really important. And as I say, at points when I felt that things were completely hopeless, I went back to that. And I think it's not so much for us here in Solidarity to remember that, but actually for for those who've sponsored and supported and executed the genocide, because it says we will win in the end. At that point, there will be an accounting. And it's really important that you think about what you're doing in the present on the basis that sooner or later you are going to lose. So that puts some context in what I want to say. Yeah, we've had the positionality bit. I'll not say very much more about that, except that in terms of the learnings from other struggles. When I was a young man many years ago, and we were doing peace and justice work in the North, we actually thought very specifically about what it meant to do this work as a Protestant. And you're dead right. Sometimes we would be constructed by our own community as self-hating. There's a specific name for us, Lundies. People are traitors, betrayed their own community. But we learned very directly from white comrades in South Africa who talked about the specific role that they were to play in the struggle against apartheid. So it's another example of the learnings that we have to bring in terms of positionality. So anyway, that's my introduction done. It must be nearly 5 minutes in.
You're exactly 5 minutes.
There's too much history. That's part of the problem, but I'll go through it. So from 1155 is when we date the start of the English colonization of Ireland. Whenever Ireland was gifted to the English state by a pope, the only English pope, by a pope at that time, and that's the colonial nexus engaged, and it continues to the present. We've never had an Independence Day. The north of Ireland is still part of the UK. And when British fascists organised around the notion of unite the kingdom, it's quite clear that the kingdom they're talking about is one that includes the north of Ireland. In fact, when they're really fantasising, they could actually see a way in which the 26 counties would be brought back into some sort of new united kingdom. So it's an unfinished business, an unfinished process for us that we're still living through. And since 1155, colonial tropes have appeared time and time again, including accusations of genocide, including ethnic cleansing. But the dominant theme, I think, in terms of understanding that history is one of settler colonialism and the expropriation of land. The Ulster Plantation is the most famous and enduring example of that, but plantations happened all over Ireland, north and south. And that plantation also provided a model for the colonization of North America. Very often it was the same people involved in it. So again, those international links, resonances are there from the first. And if you want a simple explanation for Irish solidarity with Palestine, I think it's there in that history. And that's why Irish people generally see what side they're on in that context. But because we've been asked to focus on partition, I want to say something specifically about that. Ireland is partitioned by the British in 1920 after a decade of revolutionary struggle. What happens after partition is what the great Irish socialist James Connolly predicted would be a carnival of reaction. That's exactly what happens. Now, what happens in the north is kind of quite easy to read. It's just a return to settler colonial ascendancy. It is, as it was described by our Prime Minister, a Protestant parliament for a Protestant people. It's just explicitly a return to, of the last 3 Prime Ministers, 2 of them were from settler colonial families who dated back to the Ulster Plantation. So you're talking about 400 years of continuity there. So in that sense, it's relatively easy to understand that state. South is slightly more complex because it was kind of certainly it severed itself from the United Kingdom, but it stayed within union. It was not a self-determination, but what we constructed in our book, or theorized in our book, as a white dominion. So it joined all these other states which had begun to separate themselves from the British Empire, which were also constructed as white dominions, so Canada, Australia, New Zealand, but crucially for us, South Africa, because South Africa too was named as a white dominion, but of course it had a black majority. And so the point about the notion of white dominion is that it reproduces the racial hierarchies that are imposed by colonialism in new forms, in a new form. And why that's so interesting in terms of the work you're doing here is that's precisely the form that was imagined for Palestine. There was this notion that you would have Jewish dominion within the British Empire. Now, of course, that didn't happen, but it showed the kind of thinking that was there in terms of the development of the state there. So that's it's a key example of the way that that notion of white dominion is the very antithesis of democracy. It's something which, as I say, reproduces racial categories imposed by colonialism in new forms. And that's precisely what happened in the south of Ireland. You had really a counter-revolution set in place, which I think it's important to say that a core part of the reactionary consensus that was built in the 26 counties after partition was anti-Semitism. It was an element, a key element in the kind of politics that was developed, very right-wing Catholic politics that was developed and hegemonic in the state, and has only really begun to break apart over the last 10 or 15 years. What have I got?
Oh, sorry, I was so interested. I forgot to tell you we're in 10 minutes.
Oh, right. Right. Well, then I better end. I should just say that I think the one lesson I take from the activism and the theoretical work that I've done is that the key point is that all of this is about politics. So whether you're a Zionist or anti-Zionist, it's about politics. Whether you support apartheid or you're against apartheid, it's about politics. Whether you support the partition of Ireland or you're opposed to it, it's about politics. None of it is to do with our racial identity. None of it is an ethnic imperative. And what we have to do is work out how to have the politics that put us on the right side rather than the wrong side of history. So, Sinead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, and just as part of partition made me think that so many people would have gotten a visa to get here, and just the ways in which these traces of partition linger in these other elements of international law that govern who can talk to who and who could be where we can be. But that's why it's my biggest delight to introduce our fourth panelist, John Reynolds, who works in an area of international law called Third World Approaches to International Law, which I think is doing some very exciting. It's asking the right kind of questions to deal with these kinds of issues. And to think about, can international law be a tool for obviously there's this democratic element. Obviously we can use it. Can it be a tool for dismantling empire? So John Reynolds is an associate professor of law in Maynooth University, National University of Ireland. He's the author of an award-winning book, Empire, Emergency, and International Law. And I believe you're also very active in other, academics for Palestine and other spaces. But if we could give a warm applause to John.
All right, hello everyone, and thanks very much, Sonia, and thanks to all of the organisers. And it really just is amazing to see everyone here and to have you with us in Dublin. So for everyone that's travelled here, welcome, and Fulcher Díobh Galer. My background, positionality, whatever, is not anywhere near as interesting as my co-panelists, although Ronnie did momentarily mistake me earlier for one of the hunger strikers in Longkesh in 1981, who he's been reading about, and said, "Oh, you look very young to have been on." Well, I was actually I was born that year in 1981. I do write about that a little bit in the book that you mentioned, just because that book is about colonial emergency laws, emergency powers, internment. And it kind of covers the British Empire for the most part, Ireland, India, Kenya, Palestine, and the way that some of the legal techniques and methods of empire travelled between the different colonies, the settler colonies. And so on the Ireland, Palestine, South Africa connections, I think there is some interesting stuff to say there as well. But I grew up not too far from here, like most Irish people in the south, in the latter part of the Troubles, with a general kind of anti-colonial sensibility. We learned a lot about Irish anti-colonial history in school, but not very much at all about global anti-colonial histories. That was something that I just got interested in as I grew up and was studying and reading more, and that ended up bringing me to Palestine as a legal researcher for a period, and from there to South Africa as part of a big research project that I worked on from 2007 to 2009 that was supported by the South African Research Council and by Ronnie, who was a minister and still very active in the discussions there at the time. John Dugard, who's another South African international lawyer, was the UN Special Rapporteur, one of the earlier predecessors of Francesca, who we heard from earlier. He had started to talk about the Israeli occupation as an apartheid and colonial entity in his reports, which in that period, 2006, 2007, was quite new and quite still very taboo in the UN and mainstream kind of institutional circles. The work that Rania and other colleagues in Palestine have been doing on this, on analysing and deconstructing Israeli apartheid and what it is and how it works, that has a kind of a long legacy from Palestinian activists, thinkers, intellectuals, going back to the 1950s and 60s to people like Fayez Sayegh and Sibri Jiris and other Palestinian lawyers, intellectuals, people active in the UN at the time, and so on. And so there's a long history of a Palestinian analysis of Israeli apartheid that that we can and should learn from. That has become, I think, more widely read and better understood in the last few years, but it's still, we have to recognize that it took a long time for the international institutions and even the progressive international human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and so on to catch up and accept the Palestinian analysis have been there for so long. And so that also is, does tell us something about who gets heard and whose voice has legitimacy. And I think that's really important for us to remember and think about now for these conversations, that when we're talking about decolonization and what the future looks like in Palestine today. So, but that project ended up being published in a report and then in a book format called Beyond Occupation, and that was that kind of led on to a series of other things I was involved in, including the Russell Tribunal on Palestine in Cape Town in 2011, where Ronnie was on the jury, and there was a very strong and powerful statement from that tribunal, which is a popular people's tribunal, not a formal international law institution, but again was a kind of a vanguard analysis and critique of Israeli apartheid that we see slowly some of the UN institutions starting to arrive to now. And again, we see a kind of a version of what I think about as international law from below of civil society and lawyer activists, political activists leading the way in their analysis. But through all of that, something that did strike me was that was an international research project that we worked on, but most of us that were involved in it were Irish, Palestinian or South African lawyers and researchers. There were others on the team as well, but I think it's not a coincidence that those three groups were there. It's not a coincidence that when a country, and it could have been any country, any UN member state or any state that was party to the Genocide Convention, it could have been any state that brought a case against Israel accusing it of genocide. It's not a coincidence that it was South Africa that did that. It's not a coincidence that the South African legal team is made up of South African lawyers, but also with Irish and Palestinian contributors as well. It's not a coincidence that when Germany is intervening in these debates and saying that the South African case is delegitimizing the very idea of genocide and devaluing it, that the strongest responses to Germany in those political debates were from Namibia, were from South Africa. And we see the fault lines there, I think, and we see, I think the importance of an alternative or a more radical or more progressive or more global south or third world oriented view and articulation of international law being articulated in some of those debates. And that's not in any way to kind of romanticize Irish-Palestinian solidarity or the South African case in and of itself. And we shouldn't be patting ourselves on the back too much. I think there's a lot of work still to be done, but I think it is significant. And I think that there was, even after the South Africa case started, a mural on done on the international wall up in Belfast of kind of an Ireland, South Africa, Palestine piece of art acknowledging that in some ways. And so these connections are there in terms of connections to solidarity. They have, I think, obvious roots because of the shared imperial histories of some of these settler colonial geographies that we're talking about, including the Ireland, Palestine, South Africa connections. And if I have a couple of minutes left,
got
3 minutes left. So maybe just most Irish people will be aware of this who are here, but maybe just for those who aren't, Robbie's spoken about the history of colonialism, settler colonialism here, but there is also some quite particular elements of the connections between British colonial history in Ireland and settler colonialism, imperialism in Palestine, and a few, some of the key methods of colonial violence, of colonial counterinsurgency, as well as some of the legal techniques and legal norms that I've written about, but the wider kind of legacy of violence of the British Empire, as Caroline Elkins calls it in her book. We see that with figures like Arthur Balfour of Balfour Declaration fame, and his role that we know all too well about in Palestine, but he was the Chief Secretary of the British Empire in Ireland from 1887. He brought in a series of laws criminalising groups and people in the Irish national movement at the time. There was a massacre of protesters protesting against that law in 1887 that was carried out by the RIC, the British Colonial Police here. Balfour defended them and is known in Ireland as Bloody Balfour because of that. And there's a number of these connections that we see when the RIC itself was disbanded in 1922, and the Black and Tans left Ireland. Many of them went directly to Palestine, and people will be aware of this. Figures like Charles Taggart, who was from the British colonial tradition in Ireland, let's say, son of a Protestant Church of Ireland clergyman in Derry. He ended up as a colonial administrator in the British Empire. He was a senior advisor to military intelligence in Dublin Castle under British rule here. He then goes off to India and ends up in Palestine in 1937, called in to try and help the British repress the Palestinian Revolution at the time. And he designs a series of these forts that are known as the Taggart forts. People may be aware of this. Around 60 or 70 of them built all around in historic Palestine in the interior, but also in the border areas with Lebanon in the north. Many of those, and they were used essentially as forts for the British colonial forces at the time, also as interrogation and torture centres, and many of them are still there today and used by the Israeli army for its interrogations and its practices in Palestine today. And so that kind of tells us something about the connections between these settler colonial geographies, and it tells us also about why, when Robbie talks about the unfinished revolution, the role of Ireland in complicated ways in different colonial territories, and the reasons why Irish people continue to be in solidarity, and why the inaction and the complicity of the Irish government to this day is even more shameful than it is for other parts of the world, maybe. So I better stop talking. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much. To all of the speakers, this was so interesting. For me, I think one thing that really stood out was how not only are the same colonial and historical, not only are the same like colonial logics used in all these cases, and literally the same guys often just doing, you know, sent around the empire to go and do war crimes somewhere else. But how the resistance to that, how much people who resist genocide are speaking to each other and learning from each other, and, you know, directly in dialogue. So I'm left feeling very very perplexed about the role of the international, you know, because on the one hand we have partition being a tool of international law, and you have, as Rania was saying, the kind of the silence of the international response in so many ways to what's happening. But then you also have these more grassroots mobilizations that can change the law, or that interacts in interesting ways with what people are doing. So I guess my question for all of you is it any good? To what extent? And this goes back to what Francesca Albanese said in her earlier talk. She was very positive about the law, and this is something that makes me as a legal scholar feel really good about myself. But I don't know. Is that enough? Should we be letting the legal experts determine the law, or to what extent can you, as activists and scholars, to what extent should we be keeping the law as a tool to be ending the violence and genocide, and to what extent do we need to be moving away from it? Maybe should we go in order of the speakers? Rania, do you have any responses to that?
I do, although I don't have a full answer to the question, so I'll try. But it's also something that I've researched when looking at the apartheid framework. I think I was mentioning earlier, for example, about some of the limits of the occupation framework. It was long in use, and it's not illegal in and of itself. So I think it really begs the question, to what extent can international law be a force for change in Palestine? And we do see a lot of complicity and limitations in the law. And we talk a lot about settler colonialism here. Settler colonialism as such is also not recognized per se as a crime under international law, and there are also reasons for that. So I think, you know, we can see these examples. Apartheid has a robust prohibition, and that's thanks to the anti-apartheid movement. But as I said in my presentation, like, it's often been used in Palestine, divorced from that settler colonial context, which is also problematic, and goes back to the issue of politics that was discussed on the panel. So I think from my perspective, there are certain tools that we can use in international law. That doesn't mean not recognizing its limitations. Quite on the contrary, I think we do need to know what it is that we're using. But that being said, when it comes to the apartheid framework, there are avenues for accountability that just have not been explored yet. The Apartheid Convention is still not widely ratified internationally. South Africa is one of the last ratifiers of this convention. Ireland is not a party to this convention. The vast majority of Western states are not either. So, I mean, I think that's just one example. It's one instrument. It's not the whole picture. But that's one example of avenues that can be pursued. Ratification of that instrument, pursuing accountability within the courts of third states for the crime of apartheid is something we still have not seen. The crime has never been prosecuted or punished, whether nationally or internationally. And we also know the limitations at the ICC, but the ICC too have been reluctant to pursue an investigation in relation to the crime of apartheid, while at the same time looking at other crimes that are related. So that too is a choice. And more broadly, because you mentioned Francesca and her work, I think it's important to note that the apartheid framework is not only about criminal accountability, but specifically about ending complicity in this system of oppression. And so thinking about, for example, the institutions that are invested in violations of international law in Palestine, and we are seeing that mobilization on Irish university campuses as an example, and other parts of the world, and that's something that we need to be looking into more. And also, generally, the law on apartheid requires state responsibility, and yet we have not seen any of these effective measures by states. So I think it kind of gives us a direction of the obligations that need to be enacted, while also understanding the politics at play.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Yeah. Ronnie, do you want
Okay, well, international law recognizes the right of the people to resist oppression and tyranny with arms. And when we look at the United Nations, and the United Nations is still important, despite the fact that the Trumps of this world are making a mockery of international law. And therefore we understand the frustrations of the Palestinian people. So we've got to keep that in mind. And how many resolutions have been passed and ignored by the Security Council when this General Assembly, by a massive vote, votes in favor of a Palestinian position and relation to genocide and criminality and so on. So we can't simply rely, unfortunately, wonderful world if it was just a world of relying on the law, decent law, but laws are very repressive as well. So in the South African situation, I'd like to move on a little, but not to infringe on your responses, but just looking at my watch. In our situation, we talked about how to achieve change, because after all, that's why you go to UN, and how to achieve change. And we summed it up in what we called 4 pillars of struggle. The most primary is the people mobilized, organized in struggle. That's the absolute key. And we saw that in the case of the Vietnamese, and how Ho Chi Minh and General Giap talked about that, and how in our struggle we've talked about it. So it's political, it's primary, and that's how we've seen the changes in Ireland as well and everywhere else. Primary factor, but it's got to be reinforced. So various methods of struggle, not imposing arms, but people have the right to do so. We had, as part of the 4 pillars, armed struggle, reinforcing political struggle, reinforcing, not dominating it, very important. And then an underground network to be able to get the message through to the people, to organize possibilities of political mobilization, etc., which do come. But for this assembly as well, and what was said this morning, the question of international solidarity. And in that terms, and it developed in South Africa's case and showed its efficacy and will be doing so and is doing so in relation to the Palestinian struggle. It's what we can do, and that is boycott BDS, right? This is the way. So that's what's vital. And if the Congress is to go forward in terms of what we must be discussing these coming days, is how to take the words into action and move forward. Because we are achieving it. There is change taking place. There is an isolation of Israel's Zionist entity taking place. There is the support of the Palestinian people. They are not alone in the boycott, divestment and sanctions speaks it out. And who knows so much about it around the world but ye Irish people? Remember what happened in the Dunstore issue when a 21-year-old lass decided, I'm not selling you that avocado pear. I'm not handling it because my union told me not to. That's on the boycott list. And we boycotting apartheid South Africa. And she was tossed out, she was suspended. But 11 others joined her on the picket line for nigh on 3 years. And what happened in the end? One of the greatest victories of the international movement. Mary Manning, one person set it off. One. But comrades and friends, it's not just one. Mary could do it because there was the climate for it. an international climate. She lit the fuse. And what happened after the 2.5 years, the Irish government took that decision, a legal decision, no purchase and sale of South African fruit and vegetables. And that's the path we must follow. Yeah. So that's where we talk about legal and standing up for rights and common law and natural law and humanitarian law and people's rights to struggle, because it's resistance. That's what does it in the end, the people's resistance. Thank you.
You want me to follow
yeah.
that? I think it's a tactical question, and I suppose I go back to James Connolly. I've quoted already. Like Connolly said, we believe in constitutional methods in ordinary times, and we believe in revolutionary methods in revolutionary times. So we need to decide what times we're living in, brothers and sisters. But I'll also make a point, because actually McSweeney, who I also referenced, the hunger striker, wrote in his work a pretty damning condemnation of Daniel O'Connell, who was the great pacifist mobilizer in Ireland in the 19th century, who effectively developed democratic and populist organising to deliver Catholic emancipation. So a really important figure. He also was very sound in terms of his opposition to slavery. So took on Irish Americans who wanted to support him and his work here, but were also supporters of slavery. So a man of some principle. But he organised the series of mass rallies around. I mean, huge events. We were talking of between a 500,000 and 1 million ordinary Irish people organised across the country to demand an end to the Union, and they were to culminate with a rally at Clontarf, just outside or in the north of Dublin here, and the British said, no, there's going to be trouble at it. We'll make that illegal, and O'Connell said, okay, well, we'll go home, and it didn't happen. The British state at that time was teetering on the brink because of that mass mobilisation. So the observation of legality, formal legality in that context, leaves us with the history that we have now. The Gorton War that I referred to wouldn't have happened if we'd ended the Union at that point. So, as I say, it's a tactical question, but the notion that we have to work to the law or within the law all the time is just nonsensical. And
Yeah, so this question of is international law any good is basically what we talk about at every legal academic conference, and what I talk with my students about for entire semesters, years, degree programs. So we could spend a lot of time on that, but just to say maybe a couple of brief points which will hopefully reinforce what the others have said. International law was a vehicle for European imperialism essentially from 1492 until 1960, right? In 1960, the Third World bloc became the majority in the UN, and in that year passed resolutions prohibiting colonialism in all its forms and manifestations. And through the 60s and 70s, really, there was a period where the newly independent, formerly colonized countries had a strong impulse and momentum at the UN to do things like enshrine the right to resist, to try and bring about a new international economic order, which they ultimately weren't able to do, but were able to take much more radical and progressive stands through international law against apartheid colonialism and some of the inequalities in the world. But that ultimately runs up against neoliberalism, the reactionary kind of backlash of Western power, and so on. And there's this other parallel history where from 1945 onwards, the UN and international law is functioning essentially as a form of US and Western soft power, right, in a way to contain communism, to manage the Cold War, to limit the impacts of national liberation in the colonies and so on, to maintain an economic hegemony in the world. And so within all of that, I think the point Robbie made, it is tactical, right? International law is political and is an arena of politics. We can't expect, even if there is a content to international law and some very strong positions there on paper, we can't expect that to automatically bring positive transformation in the world. It's a side of political struggle. The tactics of using legal interventions has to be done with the strategy of political interventions and transformation in mind, and law is just one tactic among the many others, the diversity of tactics that you spoke about in South Africa, and the array of different interventions through direct action, through disruption, through blocking ports and supply lines, all of the other stuff that's happening. And so the way Noura Erakat, who's a Palestinian legal scholar, talks about this is that you have to think about when is it useful to use the legal tactic in support of the political strategy, when is it not useful. And I think the example I always come back to as I think a very useful one is the way that the SWAPO, the Southwest African People's Organization in Namibia, talked about and engaged with international law because there was some similarities there with a series of International Court of Justice decisions through the 50s and 60s, and ultimately the strongest one in 1970. And their approach was, yes, that's useful, and yes, that's great to have reinforcement for our self-determination and our position, but we can't... we have to treat international law still with a certain irreverence. We can't put all our eggs into that basket. And instead of saying, okay, now we have an ICJ opinion in our favor, that's our work done, we just have to get states to implement that. They took that, and the very next day they went about organizing the unions, the social movements, the church groups on the ground in Namibia internationally, and some of their writings on this through the 70s and 80s, I think, are really useful ways of thinking about that. So I'll stop there for you.
Thank you so much. So before I open it up to the floor, I want to give all the panelists an opportunity, which you may choose to take or not take, to respond to any of the other panelists or to ask anything or say anything. Yes, Ronnie.
Yeah, Ronnie, I think it would be useful for you to speak to the contemporary issue that we talked about around the use of the new but old use of Bantustans as a new partition in South Africa. How reactionary that is, because it's obviously drawing on a paradigm that was imposed by apartheid, but it's scary how relevant it is now. So.
Okay, well, two things. One, in terms of looking at the law, and one doesn't lightly say to people, break the law. And we're having to say that to our young people in South Africa because they can vote, but they want guns now. And I am one of the people who explained to them why we took up the gun after Sharpeville. And that if you don't like this government, the ANC, there's plenty not to like about it, by the way, and I'm still a member of the Communist Party and the ANC. But we say to them, it's not the gun now. We do have a universal franchise and all the problems that might go with the vote, and try to get them to accept that, and it's damn hard. But we're living in a world where somebody like bleeding Mark Rubio goes to Munich and he tells these former colonial powers that the independence movements in Africa and elsewhere in the last century, that was all a communist conspiracy. And stand up, you Europeans. We got to get back to civilization when there was colonialism in the world. What are we facing? What is Palestine and Lebanon and Iran facing? And when you talk about Bantustans in South Africa, South African Jews who have left our delightful country to live in the Zionist entity basically run a rag called the Jerusalem Post. You know what they're writing? they're writing that the whole bleeding mess in South Africa is because we decided on a unitary state. We should have a country in which the Zulus rule the Zulus, Xhosa rule the Xhosa, the Venda, the Tutu, the Sutu, Shangaan, the Shangaan. They're talking about go back to the Bantustans. You can see what's in their minds. When you talk about money, and I'm not talking about Jewish money, I'm talking about Zionist money, I'm talking about big business money in South Africa, talking about Western money. The xenophobia that's underway in South Africa and the parallels between what happened to in Durban recently and Belfast and what's still happening in South Africa and building up for the end of this month, it's all because they want to smash our sovereignty without invading it and dealing with it like they tried to deal with Iran and the way they want to deal with Cuba and so on. Because the counter-revolution is something we're now facing in terms of what Rubio's speech is all about. And of course, that's big business. That's the corporates. That's what's the talk all about. They want to undo all the advances in the anti-colonial struggles, of which Ireland is perhaps the first example. We know that about Irish struggle against oppression. So I think we've got to look very carefully at the issue of the law. We've got to fight it out at the UN. We've got to absolutely say no division, no divide and rule, no Bantustans, no two-state issue, which of course Netanyahu and company have flushed down the toilet anyway. So what do I come to say in the end? Other than that, in a sense, it's still a debate. How are we analyzing the world we live in? And who can say where it's going? But what we can say with absolute certainty is to unite the populace, to raise the awareness, to see what methods are most suitable. And where we are talking about international solidarity, how to go about that, and where we've got the tool of BDS in relation to Palestine, etc., how to use it. The only other thing I'd like to quickly say, it's a very big difference between Palestine issue and South Africa, because everybody talks about those very marked similarities, is that in South Africa there wasn't genocide. Genocide takes place when you don't want them, those others. We don't need them. My good God, you know South Africa, you couldn't build, the Brits couldn't build up South Africa without cheap black labor. That's why there's been no genocide there. The genocide in Israel goes back to what happened to the people of the Americas, the people of Australasia, etc. That's what it goes. It is so barbaric. It is so disgusting. And this is what we basically fighting. I just wanted to put that last point in mind, because this is why the Israeli public and its rulers have gone absolutely bloody berserk, far more than those Boers and the Brits in South Africa ever went. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ronnie. So, just in the interest of time, because we have to end at .30 sharp, we're going to move to questions from Q&A from the audience. I don't know if there's a microphone coming. Oh, thank you very much. Maybe this gentleman. Sorry. Great idea. So I think it was yourself. I think it was you with the red, and then I think it was you with the bandana. Great. So we'll start off with those three, then see how we get on.
Yes. Yeah. Very brief question. to what extent, and Ronnie was touching on it, to what extent can we limit the analysis to colonialism, and how much do we need to bring in the question of class and capitalism? Because after all, the Arab regimes suffered colonial rule, but they're absolutely on the Zionist side. It's not quite, in other words, there is settled colonialism from the Zionist point of view, but from world capitalism that's backing Israel to the hilt, it's all about money, oil, and its own class interest.
Great, thank you. Who was our second? I think it was, yes.
Oh, you're holding, sorry. Sorry, I've got two questions. Sorry, too close. Robert, one question. Why are the ultra-unionists strong supporters of Israel? That's one thing, right? And the second thing is, in relation to the 7th of October, I mean, it is quite clear that the Israelis were, in effect, in cahoots with Hamas, in effect, that allowed them in for the killing of 1,200 people and the capturing of 250-odd hostages. I mean, they had the intel, they had everything else. Why has that been so quiet? Why aren't we highlighting that that was orchestrated by Israel for them to go into Gaza? And just one other final thing is, I don't think, I mean, the use of arms, I don't agree with Ronnie at this day and age, use of arms is a way forward because it's an excuse. I mean, Hamas fire a few rockets into Israel, Israel then blow it to bits. Hezbollah fired a few rockets in, most of them are stopped by the dome deflection, and then they blew it to bits. So the use of arms is not going to help. It gives Israel an excuse to do even more destruction.
Thank you. And then our third question before we give our speaker, and so,
1 second, sorry. Okay, I'll try to do this as fast as I can. I wanted to first of all mention this in honor of the 150th anniversary of the victory for the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho people in the Battle of Greasy Grass, aka Battle of Little Bighorn, and also indigenous resistance in Abya Yala and Turtle Island. I wanted to ask, as someone who grew up in the so-called US, because there seems to be debate about the term apartheid in terms of Jim Crow, but also the so-called reservations, or what I would consider concentration camps, wherein the indigenous people of these lands are forced to participate in the racist oppressive system for survival, on top of the US government continuing to terrorize indigenous communities from Abya Yala and Turtle Island through ongoing rape, murder, sudden disappearances, and kidnappings by ICE, and the continued lynchings and mass imprisonment, aka enslavement, of Black Americans, and the terrorizing that the disgusting imperialist US military bestows across the world. I was wondering if someone could speak on that and how to involve the fight and dismantling of the fucking US empire.
I suggest more questions.
sorry?
Take some more questions.
Sorry. I think we might just take more questions now. We might take a couple more. So we had. Sorry. Oh yes. So no pressure. You'll probably.
Yeah. First of all, thank you to the speakers. I mean, it's so interesting to see. The Brits, of course, were at the base of it all, with divide and rule, white supremacy, and everywhere they went, that's what they did. It was their way of ruling. And then the whole fragmentation and the ranking of races as well. So my main point is racism the thing we should be calling out Israel as a racist state? Is that something that people will understand? And the second thing, I cannot stand here today without mentioning the other thing that all of our struggles have in common, and that is the prisoners. And the prisoners in Palestine are the most oppressed leadership of the Palestinian people. And if we don't get those 10,000 people out, we won't succeed. So I would love to hear what you think about the efficacy of leadership in terms of the different forms of resistance, but most of all, what we think about those prisoners suffering today and how we get them out. Thank you.
All right. Are you okay to take one more?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll take one more question, and then we'll give our speakers a chance to respond. I'm so over. Okay, yes. Oh, sorry, never mind. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Dahi Doolan. I'm a Sinn Féin councillor here in Dublin. And I just want to, in awe of our panel, but particularly Ronnie. Ronnie, you and your brothers and sisters in the ANC were there for us, going back before the peace process, but also particularly during the peace process, your practical support, your political support guided us through some very, very difficult decisions. And we learned an awful lot from you. Our struggle isn't over, but when we do have a united Ireland, the ANC, the MK, and you and your brothers and sisters will have a very, very special place in our hearts. And when you think of international solidarity is crucial. We got it, we give it. When you came here, you didn't lecture, you spoke to us. We listened and we learned, and we applied it. And one of the questions I have for the panel is international solidarity. During the destruction of the apartheid South Africa, the boycott was huge. It was popular. It was mainstream. You could not have bought South African produce in Ireland. They were boycotted culturally, economically, and on the sports field. What can we do? What can we do now to make sure that the boycott of Israel is as mainstreamed and as popularised as it was against apartheid in South Africa? Gura míle maith.
Thank you. My sincere apologies to everyone. We're going to give the speakers 5 minutes or a few minutes, and if we have any time afterwards, we'll go back to you. So maybe Rania, do you have any? I think you've been given quite a lot to work with. So maybe if you have any brief comments or you want to focus on one of the questions, that would be great.
There are a lot of questions that I can't be honest with that.
What's his name?
But I'll answer one of the questions, the one that's actually calling Israel out as a racist state. And I'll say absolutely, Israel is a racist state, and that's the apartment behind the apartment.
Thank you so much. Okay, great. So we might just move along very quickly, and then in the coffee you might get a chance to speak to the panelists. Ronnie, do you want to speak to any of the?
I think let's reverse.
Oh, brilliant.
All right. Okay. Very briefly, I'll speak to the Protestants point. It's essentially settler colonial solidarity, and I can speak for 3 hours on this if you want to collar me at some point, but that at the very essence, that's what it's about. That's what I said in a relatively simplistic way. The reason why most Irish people are in solidarity with Palestinians is that they're observing settler colonialism in real time, and it's a horrible thing. But I mean, it resonates with history, and it's exactly the same point in terms of why unionists. Now I'm starting to give the lecture now, but it's framed by a history of Christian Zionism, which has been really, really important in terms of unionism. But as I say, I can speak to that in depth if people want me to develop that. So I think Betty's point about the prisoners is absolutely crucial. There's no question that in South Africa, and particularly in the north of Ireland, that without the space that was created, the politics that came out of the prisoners, that our peace process would have been impossible. So, what lessons we learn in terms of how difficult it is to recreate or repeat that in terms of Palestine. It's certainly a crucial question. I don't know that I know the answer to it, but it's absolutely the right question to ask.
Yeah, thank you. John, do you want to?
Yeah, there's so much there. So thanks to everyone. I'd agree with that about the centrality of the prisoners. I think some of the campaign, that's been one of the most striking and significant manifestations of Irish-Palestinian solidarity over the years in both directions. For the exchanges and communications, letters between prisoners, and it's very revealing of the essence of colonial power as well. So. I think that is, a major focus of campaigning that should be there. The other, just one very briefly on the first point about class and capitalism, I think, this is obviously a significant element as well. Ghassan Kanafani, who was a Palestinian writer, leader, Marxist revolutionary, used to always emphasize and insist that the Palestinian movement and Palestinian freedom and the freedom struggle wasn't just against Israel and Zionism, it was against US empire, and it was against the reactionary kind of class politics of the Arab regimes. And so, I think that is still the reality today, and still, an important part of the analysis and therefore of how campaigns should be organized. And even if we think about what Francis Black was talking about earlier and the reasons why, even the moderate proposal that should have been brought through after she tabled that legislation to ban trade with settlements so many years ago, the reason that still hasn't been done is to do with US capitalism and foreign investment and its influence in Ireland and on Irish politics. And so we can't get away from that, no matter how close or far away from the region we go. Just on the last one, and I'll finish on this because I know we're up on time, but one thing to say about there's so many different elements and layers of the international solidarity movement and of the boycott itself. But since I think you mentioned sports, and that was obviously a big feature when it came to South Africa, and we know how important rugby and cricket and so on was to the ruling class there, right? There was maybe been an assumption that it's not really the same in Israel, and there's different elements of the cultural boycott and so on that are more important, but I think I did hear at some point Ilan Pape talking about this and talking about how big of a thing it would be if Israel was suspended from UEFA or FIFA, and he can correct me if I'm misquoting him on that. But that obviously is something where Ireland can, and where the activist community is showing leadership at the moment in the Stop the Game campaign to do with the football matches against Israel in the autumn, the initiative from the membership of the Football Association here to bring the motion to compel the association here to table the issue of Israel's membership in UEFA. There's obviously pushback against that at European level. There's pushback against that at the Irish institutional level here. But to see how much traction and momentum that Stop the Game campaign has got in the couple of short months since it's started has been really impressive. And I think there's, obviously the authorities are on the back foot now and trying to get out of it by fudging it and moving the home leg to a neutral venue, but I don't think the campaign is going to stop anytime soon, and so I'd urge everyone to get involved with that as they can.
Thank you so much. So we're out of time, but so Ronnie, do you want to send the close?
I'll really be brief. I really want to thank the comrade who raised the issue of the political prisoners. One can't recall such depravity since the Nazis. And you know something? The Nazis were ashamed. They hid it. They tried to hid it. These buggers don't. They put it out there. That says something. That really says something. Question of Little Bighorn, what happened to the Native Americans and natives everywhere in the world, that's very relevant as well. Obviously, we can't include everything in a 10-minute response, but that's what the working groups are about. And really, to a great hero in South Africa, the councillor at the back there, who says, what else can the Irish do? I just want to say he's a hero in South Africa. Everybody passes on these sequences that he appears in, and he's someone to follow. But let's deal with that in the coming discussions. I think this question of class and colour is so vital, and it's not just all about race. It's the class issue. We know that, and of course the UN definition and so on of apartheid leaves out class. There was obvious concessions there and racial discrimination. We're fighting a class issue in South Africa now. So it's not just about the race issue, but the race issue is something we really have to stand up to, and it's interlinked with the class issue. And of course, this is where we expose Israel. When we call Israel a settler, colonial, Zionist, apartheid state, we're talking about the race aspect there. There's one question that the beginning, and that was about October 7th, and whether somehow the deep state in Israel had some doings with that. You know, it's a very controversial question, and I would rather us discuss it where we've got time.
Great idea.
It's possible for sure, but I'm not putting any blame on those who gave their lives in an attack, not on Jewish children and women, and there were blessed few. In fact, we know what the Hannibal Directive commanded in relation to the numbers. But in terms of an execution against the wardens, those who kept the inmates inside Gaza, I would say that is a military operation that is going to be studied for years and years to come by military experts, just as the Israelis have been studying the Warsaw Ghetto uprising for decades, in terms of, in their minds, knowing how they were going to have to put out Gaza and the West Bank and so on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's give a final round of applause for all the amazing panelists.
Well done.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone. Looking forward to the sessions. Yeah, thank you so much.
And thanks to the audience.
Hey, yeah. Before people are leaving, I really request just 15 more minutes here to stay before you go for your coffee, because our colleague from Gaza is waiting to talk to us. So just quarter of an hour yet still to go, 15 minutes. And I need Stefan to come here. And do we have the connection? Good. So I'm just requesting just a few more minutes. And then your coffee will be waiting for you outside. But the person from Gaza really needs this moment now with us. Thank you for the patience.
Wait a second, Ayad. Wait a second. Wait a second, Ayad, please. Yeah. So my name is Stéphane Jouteux. I am a French trade unionist, and I am also a member of the steering committee of this Congress. I work with Jérôme Le Gavre, who is an MP from La France Insoumise and also an activist of the Independent Workers' Party, and he will deliver a keynote tomorrow evening. I would like to introduce the next speaker. Ayad Amawi is going to speak live from Gaza. He is a human rights and child rights advocate from Gaza, Palestine. He is the representative of Doctors Against Genocide and Children, Not Numbers. He is a humanitarian activist, international development practitioner, and advocate for humanitarian causes in Gaza. Ayad, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Stefani. And first of all, from my heart, from the heart of suffering, from Gaza, I hope to thank the Congress for giving us this valuable opportunity to convey the suffering of my people in Gaza. Indeed, the Anti-Zionist Congress is an important platform that seeks to promote justice and peace. Really very nice from the heart of humanity to meet people like you, my friends, brothers, sisters, that defend for humanity. Here from Gaza, I will mention, quoted some real speech from Dr. Qassam Abu Safiya. He sent me a message before he jailed maybe 2 days, supporting patients and wounded. And he, before he were arrested, he knew very well this is his dedication to caring for patients would likely lead to his arrest. Dr. Hussam and all of the Gaza still waiting the real ceasefire. We here living under the selective firing. Before 2 hours, they hit it. Civilians in their tents, and we have more than 2 martyrs and many casualties. At all, we maybe after 9 days, we will endure 10 or 1,000 days of genocide in Gaza. There is no real firing here. We here still living under the bombardment, intensifying siege, the lack of every essential things. We does not talk about the peace agreement or something like that. We passed more than 100,000 people were martyred, and also the continuity force killing people is still ongoing. And we have more than 18,000 people still waiting evacuation, medical evacuation, especially children who are suffering from cancers and also amputations, and we need high quality materials for rehabilitations. So we does not talk about destructions, just the buildings. They destroy everything. They destroy the infrastructures. They convert our environment to infectious environment, unlivable environments. We talk about rat infestation. We talk about disease. The environment here produces disease at all of the time. And also, when we talk about the summer, now we suffer from the high shortage in providing drinking water for our civilians here, especially after a lot of agencies have difficulties providing the desalination station, especially in the center of the Gaza and on the south of the Gaza Strip, with the fuels and the oil for the generators. We talk here about if there's no oil, there's no life. So the pressure from my colleagues, from all of that activists, must increase. We need to increase awareness. The genocide here in Gaza is still ongoing. It's not stopped, really. Hello? You hear me? Yeah.
We hear you. Thank you.
Yeah. I need to talk about little things if we have time. Really, my children here, all of our children, we have more than 64,000 of orphans. Most of them still living in tents. The meaning of tents is nothing. There is no home, there is no real infrastructure, there is no schools. We really lose our next generation, my colleagues. When I talked before to the media about losing next generation, I mean the lack of education process, the lack of schools, destruction, the lack of the basic needs for the childhood to grow up in the normal or partially normal lives. When my children also still talking to me, my father, we will live tomorrow after the huge bombardment at every night. They're still using the high explosive robotic in the eastern part of the Gaza. And they shrink us and push us to still living in the western part of the Gaza. And they announce they control more than 70% of Gaza Strip. That means they push us, and more than 2.5 million people still living in bad conditions, in destructed environment. And also we're still waiting the implementation of the first phase of the ceasefire agreement. The number of trucks is shrinked within the last 10 days. There is no real aids entering Gaza. They prevent the mobile homes to enter Gaza with enough number that meets our needs. And also in the summer, they prevent the batteries, rechargeable batteries, the solar plants, and the oil to enter in Gaza. They really have a systematic and well-done policy that control everything and every piece entering Gaza under the clarification of their security. but there is no means for the children's security in Gaza, for the medical evacuation, for providing our people with the basic needs to still alive. So we're talking about the systematic way to destroy social life and re-engineer the starvation. When we talk about starvation, we talk about more than 500,000 people, they lose their works after they destroy farmers, factors. Every local authorities have destroyed. There is no ability to rehabilitate our society with the delaying entering any aids that can meet our needs. And we talk about the childhood and the loss of hope. From my testimonies, at the start point of the genocide, our testimonies recorded that horrible scenes for the childhood. I does not know how our children will pass in their future after 3 years of genocide, of ongoing genocide, after starvations, and they affected their immune system. We have a lot of diseases that we have no ability in the health sector to have a medication for them. And we still sending human appeals to evacuate those children to save their lives, or grant the NGOs the full permission without any restrictions to entering the medicines and the mobile hospitals and the medical missions. Also, my colleagues, they prevent the medical missions entering with enough numbers, with enough materials or medical supplies that needed to my people. So when we talk about the policy, they use well done hidden policy under the table. They need to destroy every hope to resume our normal life and to rebuild Gaza. As they mentioned in their political statements, they need to expel us from Gaza. I don't know where, but this is our region. This is our land. We will not leave. We will not give up. And we depend all over the free people like you to increase the pressure, to increase awareness, to talk all of the politicians around the world. This horrible scenes of brutality must stop now. There's no time for humanity to still waiting some political statements. Our people here, our civilians, also in Gaza or West Bank, have a right to stay alive with their standards like any other peoples. It's enough, my people. Thank you so much for granting me this opportunity, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Iyad.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will do everything we can here.
Please, we need you. We need you.
I hope you hear the people.
Yeah, I hear him.
Free Gaza.
Thank you so much. Free Gaza. Free Palestine. Free Palestine. Free Palestine. Free Palestine. Free Palestine. Free Palestine. Yeah. Palestine. Free Palestine. Free Palestine. Free Palestine. Free Palestine.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
You and your family. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
We will be back here in 15 minutes. Please try to keep it short. We still have another panel. I promise you good stuff in the panel. I'm moderating it, so it has to be.
Thank you so much for your. Thank you.
So we don't have glass. We would like to slowly begin. I have a few important things. Can people sit down already, please? I really love the energy in this room. Thank you for your patience for this day. We're about to start our last panel for the day, but I need to remind you a few things and to tell you a few things. First of all, we would like to pay the attention to the company Palestine, cola and water that have provided us with drinks. So that's great. I hope you see it around. Regarding Palestine cola, yes, thank you. I just drink their water, that's why I think of the water. Tomorrow we will begin at 10 o'clock, just for you to know. Those who join us tomorrow feel very invited to come on time. We would start with a panel, and from 12 o'clock we would have our first workshop session. And we have managed to upload the website for the workshops. And that's very important that you register so that we have some organization of how many people are in which room. Tomorrow we're going to have, as I said, from 12 o'clock, 4 different workshops happening in parallel. So you need to choose, and it's hard because all of them are amazing. But I'm going to tell you which ones they are. In a moment, we're going to have a QR code that I sent you. Great. We can have it here. What you're going to have to do is to scan the QR code. And if that's too difficult, you need to go online to our website. But it's a secret site because that's only for you guys and not for the outside world. Because only the people who are here can sign up for workshops. The website is called JAZIC.org, so JAZIC.org/myworkshops in one word. With an S or without an S in the end? My workshops, because that's the website where you would see all the workshops for every day, because we have here 3 of those sessions. Tomorrow at 12 is the first session. Tomorrow afternoon is the second session of another 4 workshops you need to choose from. And on Sunday, finally, at 10 o'clock, the last session of workshops, another 4 workshops to choose from. And everything is very good, so it's hard to choose. Tomorrow we're going to have at 12 o'clock, as I said, criminalizing resistance. That's one workshop. The second one would be dock workers in Europe. The third would be Gaza is the compass. And the fourth, Recess for Revolutionary. This is a small workshop, so you have to sign up for that if you want to try to do some theater improvisation. So try to sign up to this. You don't have to do this now, but you do have to. We don't have the QR code yet. Did you receive? Try again the email I sent it. Jesus Christ. Sorry, that was me. Checking your awareness. Okay, we can do it after the panel here. You would get the QR code, and you could do that. You can do it until the last minute, by the way. That's okay if you sign up tomorrow morning as well. Okay? Good. Now we're going to have to start our panel. So... Oh, sorry. This thing fell. And now I'm going to have to sit here for this. Thanks. And I think the slide should be our panel now. It's another one. Yeah? Okay, good.
Going to shut this on?
Yes, I think it's another slide, and then we would be a bit more... Okay, thank you. Let's start. So I think I already presented myself. I'm Hadass, and I'm here to moderate this panel. I won't be doing much work apart from keeping the time. But yeah, I would like to present. That's good like this? Okay. Ah, that's the wrong slide. Whatever problem is happening here is actually my fault. So, but yeah, it has been quite challenging. If Kati is around, maybe she can help with this. Okay, we can keep that one. I can present our speakers. In this panel called Breaking the Chains from Within, it's the one panel in this Congress that we're going to discuss what is the role actually of anti-Zionist Jews nowadays. It's a very, very complicated question, but we have a very interesting panel here to try to reply to that. We might have disagreements, but that's what we are here for. So let's just dive into it. With us are Ronnie Barkan, long-term activist, but you guys would have to present yourself as well. We have Zachary Foster next to Ronnie, coming to us all the way from the US, right? Historian. Chaim Breshit, who has been the co-initiator of this Congress altogether, as well an activist, I think maybe all of your life, but you can talk about that. A professor and a filmmaker, and Noah, that we met earlier today. Noah Schnall, who has been recently on the flotilla, but also on another one in the past, if I remember correctly. And I would like to start with each of you telling a short sentence about yourselves, just so we get to know all of you and the main point of what you want the people to know about you, and then we would dive into the notes, okay? Noah, you can start.
Oh, okay.
About yourself,
yeah.
First.
My name is Noah Avishag Schnall. I was born in the United States and raised in an extremely Zionist household. I now live in Paris. My father is Polish, Ashkenazi Jew. My mother is a Yemeni Jew born in Tiberias in occupied Palestine, and her parents were born in Yemen. And so the dichotomy between, or the intermixing of both of those communities, it created my perspective on anti-Zionism, which has a lot to do with colorism, subjugation, white supremacy, Jewish supremacy. Is that enough?
Yes, it's
okay.
perfect. Couldn't be perfect. Chaim, to you, a short sentence about yourself, first of all.
I'm an Israeli Jew. I'm a son of two Holocaust survivors from Auschwitz. I was born in a refugee camp in Rome, came to Israel as a baby in 1948, and grew up in a town called Jabalia, which is not the Jabalia you think of in Gaza, but one in Jaffa, from which the Palestinians were expelled. But, of course, the Jabalia in Jaffa is the place they ended up, and that's why it's called Jabalia. And the last thing I want to say, in Jabalia in Jaffa, there were no Israelis. There were only survivors of the camps in Europe and survivors of the Nakba. And you know what? They lived together very, very well.
Zach.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zachary Foster. I grew up in the U.S., suburban Detroit. In a very Jewish environment. I did a PhD in Palestinian history, focusing on the origins of Palestinian identity. So I have an academic background. Now I run an educational and media brand website called Palestine Nexus. We publish work from writers in Palestine, especially Gaza. And we try to provide historical context and history to help people better understand the present moment. That's my main focus right now.
Thank you.
Ronnie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ronnie. I'm an Israeli dissident. I find it interesting how we even, again, the issue of identity, how we each define ourselves based on the context, which is, and this also kind of defines where we're heading in the struggle. So I define myself as pretty much how I want to be, an Israeli dissident, a conscientious objector, and on and on. But I always have to remind myself and others that there's another way to define me, which is not how I see myself, but how the Zionist state sees me, which is a privileged Israeli Jew. And I mentioned it earlier, not because I choose to be this or that, but because this is how I am defined in the law and otherwise. So in this kind of tension between the two things, I live and try to operate and try to go with the first and against the second. And that led to being a conscientious objector and being, I grew up, by the way, not in a very Zionist household, but it is still not anti-Zionist, so basically we didn't talk about it, but it is there all the time. This is the norm. It is an entire society that is based on that. And the entire society, that the variation between the views there is very different. So I went against that in this or that way. A bit of conscientious objection, a bit of activism, anarchists against the wall, the West Bank, etc., then BDS, and later on other things.
Thank
and
you.
This, which is part of the struggle.
Yes. I want to drop the question that I want to focus on tonight. So, what is the role, in your opinion, for anti-Zionist Jews like us nowadays? And I would like to start with Zach.
Sure.
So you have your 8 minutes.
So usually when we talk about Zionism, the history of Zionism, we talk about the impact that the Zionist movement had on the Palestinians. Rightfully so. I spent 15 years of my life writing about Palestinian history, focusing on the impact of Zionism and the State of Israel on the Palestinians. And that's correct, because the Palestinians are obviously the primary victims of the Zionist movement. But I want to pick up on something Francesca Albanese said earlier, which is, I think most people in this room are well aware of the consequences that Zionism has had on the Palestinians, but we also want to meet people where they're at. And we're also trying to compel and convince Jews and non-Jews alike who believe all kinds of myths about Zionism, such as the Zionist movement set out to save Jews fleeing persecution. That's sort of the narrative. That's the grand story that Zionists tell about Zionism and why we should support it. I mean, let's just say you accept that Zionism had negative consequences for the Palestinians. You accept that, but there's another piece to that story that I want to focus on in the next few minutes, which is that although the Zionists claim they were all about saving Jews fleeing persecution, the reality of the history of the Zionist movement is quite the opposite. And I want to spend a few minutes talking about that, which is that in the early period, before World War I, the Zionist movement rejected about 61% of Jews that wanted to immigrate to Palestine. Arthur Rupin and Menachem Shenkin were the Zionist officials based in Jaffa who rejected, like I said, 61% of the applicants. Why were they rejected? The primary reason for the rejection? They were too destitute. They were too poor. The Zionist movement didn't want poor Jews. They wanted wealthy Jews to prop up those flailing colonial settlements, those flailing economic enterprises that were not self-sustaining. That's why they needed financial backstops. That's why they wanted rich Jews, not poor Jews. After World War I, Chaim Weizmann, he had obviously compelled the British government to adopt the Balfour Declaration. So now after World War I, it's 1919, 1920, the British have established a British Mandate in Palestine. And at the same time, you had about 50 to 100,000 Ukrainian Jews that were murdered in pogroms in Ukraine during the Russian Civil War from 1918 to 1922. So you had hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian Jews fleeing, looking for a safe haven. Chaim Weizmann goes to the British in 1920 and 1921 and compels them to reduce Jewish immigration quotas to Palestine. Well, that would be a strange thing to do if you were all about saving Jews from persecution, wouldn't it be? Because he didn't want refugees. He didn't want Ukrainian refugees. He didn't want families with kids and elderly people who had diseases. No, those people would burden the Zionist movement. And so he actually went to the British and he compelled them to reduce the number of Jews allowed to Palestine. He said, this is a direct quote, even 1% of them, if they show up to Palestine, will ruin the whole Zionist project. Because they were refugees. They were, by definition, unwanted. The Zionist movement wanted ideologues. So not just wealthy Jews, but also ideological Jews who wanted to move to Palestine in order to build a Jewish state. The point was building a Jewish state. In 1922, you had thousands of Jews who faced anti-Jewish persecution in Iran. They fled to Baghdad. The Baghdad Zionists wrote letters to the Palestine office. We got thousands of Jews, Iranian Jews. They're fleeing. They need a safe haven. The Palestine office wrote back, we don't want refugees. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, the Zionist movement actually sent Jews back to Europe. Those misfits, those outcasts, those invalids, those diseased Jews, those unwanted Jews, they were sent back to Europe. In fact, they were sent back to Nazi Germany after 1933. Between 1933 and 1939, the Zionist movement rejected about 2/3 of the German Jews that wanted to migrate to Palestine. Well, if you were all about saving Jews fleeing persecution, presumably the German Jews would be at the top of the list. They were living in Nazi Germany, but most of them were rejected because they were of the incorrect human material. They were weak, they were poor, they were refugees. They wanted to move to Palestine for material reasons, not for ideological reasons, so they were unwanted. In 1938, Ben-Gurion, leader of the Zionist movement, a famous quote in a Jewish agency executive meeting after the Kristallnacht pogrom, in which 91 Jews are slaughtered, thousands of Jewish businesses destroyed. It's the most severe pogrom in Nazi Germany to date. Ben-Gurion tells the Jewish agency, if I could have saved all, and so after that pogrom, you have this effort to rescue Jewish children from Germany to Britain, 10,000 of them. It's called Kindertransport. They're going to take these Jews to Britain. Ben-Gurion says to his comrades, to his affiliates in the Jewish agency executive, he says, if I could have saved all those Jews and brought them to Britain, or if I could have saved only half those Jews, if I could have saved all those Jews and brought them to Britain, or if I could have only saved half those Jews, but the half I could save would come to Palestine, I would save the half. In 1940, American Zionists compelled U.S. President Roosevelt at the time to, because Roosevelt had this idea, we're going to save 150,000 Jews in Europe. The American Zionists said, what do you mean, save them? Wait, save them to the United States? Those Jews are needed as demographic weapons in Palestine. And so they sabotaged the rescue efforts. It wasn't just American Jews that sabotaged rescue efforts. It was also the Zionist community in Palestine. After World War II, you have hundreds of thousands of Jews in the DP camps in Austria and Germany and Italy. Ben-Gurion travels to the displaced person camps, and he meets with the displaced person leaders, Holocaust survivors, people who just survived 5 years of hell. And he compels them, do not allow any Jews to be rescued to France, Germany, the US, and Italy, or elsewhere. At a time when you had all these attempts to rescue all of these Jewish displaced persons, Holocaust survivors, Ben-Gurion said, no, we need those Jews in Palestine. And I'll just end on this one note. I think I'm probably running out of time, but after 1948, after the Zionist movement is in control of its own immigration policy, the selective immigration policy continues. In fact, between 1948 and 1954, a majority of North African Jews were rejected. Not that they wanted to come to Palestine in the first place. Actually, most of them wanted to go to Europe. But in fact, 2/3 of Moroccan Jews were rejected. Why? For the same reasons, the 4 criteria. What's your profession? Can you work? Can you help us build a Jewish state in a country that's 90, 80, 70% non-Jewish? Do you have capital? Are you bringing money with you? Because that's what the Zionist movement needs. So it's your profession, it's how much capital you have, it's your health status. Are you healthy? Are you going to be a burden on us? We're not about saving diseased, persecuted Jews fleeing persecution. No, we want you to be healthy. And that's why they rejected a majority of the Moroccan Jews that wanted to move to Israel after 1948 until 1954. And they loosened the policy afterwards. They also needed Jews to line the frontier, to act as human shields on the front line, as the state of Israel built 120 settlements along the frontier in the north, along the border with Lebanon, in the quote-unquote Gaza envelope, all those towns that were attacked on October 7th. Well, guess what? Those towns were built for the purpose of putting civilians on the front lines as human shields, and that's what they were tragically used for on October 7th. And so I think when we're zooming out and thinking about the Zionist movement, we're all well aware that the Zionist movement was catastrophic for the Palestinian people. Displacement, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and now genocide. But I think it's also incumbent upon us to learn that the Zionist movement was not about rescuing Jews. It wasn't about saving Jews fleeing persecution. It wasn't about that in the 1910s or 20s or 30s or 40s. It wasn't about that in the 1950s. And today, we want to bring the story all the way up to the present day. Where are Jews most in danger? Where is a Jew most likely to be targeted for being Jewish? Well, guess what? It's not the United States. It's not here in Ireland. It's in Israel.
Ronnie, please, you're going to be next, and then Noah, and then Chaim, okay? Please learn from Zach about keeping the time.
Over?
No, it was perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
So when we talk about the history of Zionism and how about the myth of the Zionist state being somehow a safe haven for Jews, which is clearly not, certainly not today and also not in the past, as we heard, there is one more point that kind of comes to mind, and I think it is kind of worth mentioning, and that is at the height of the Nazi persecution, 1942. There were two incidents that are worth mentioning. One was that there was the negotiation between Yoel Brandt and Rudolf Eichmann. And where Brandt, who was a representative of the Zionists, he was still about saving Jews from Europe. And Eichmann offered him this deal that is called the blood for goods. We will release 1 million Jews from around Hungary in exchange for 10,000 truckloads of things that the Nazis needed, supplies, coffee, etc. And he even offered to have a 10% installment, the first installment, 10%, 1,000 trucks for 100,000 people. Yoel Brandt, who was negotiating with the devil, he was shocked by that, but he understood the great opportunity here to save people, 1 million. So he went to his bosses, the Zionist bosses. He was on the way to Palestine, and I think that around Turkey he was apprehended because it was the Zionists who notified the authorities to arrest him, and he was kept basically silenced for a few months, and instead they appointed Kastner, the other Rudolf Kastner. Oh, sorry, when I say Rudolf. Anyway, they appointed Rudolf Kastner, and Kastner was negotiating with Eichmann, but he had something very different in mind. Kastner was a Zionist, and as we heard, the Zionists were not about saving Jews from Europe. They did not care about that. We know that the Zionists in the US, they were acting against even sending food aid to the ghettos of Europe. People like Weiss, Rabbi Weiss in the US. And Rudolf Kastner, he was negotiating with Eichmann about something very different. At that time, two people managed to escape Auschwitz concentration camp, Rudolf Werber and Wexler. And they are pretty much the only people that we know that I think managed to escape and tell the story, survive. And they wrote a comprehensive report about what was happening there with maps and everything. They managed to hand this to the Zionist who was negotiating with Eichmann. He sat on that report. He never published it. Instead, so he never published anything that was happening in Auschwitz. Instead, he was negotiating with Eichmann for something very different, about saving the select few Zionists, people of his family, and the ones that were the wealthy, the ideologues, and so on, and have them being basically escape from there and being transferred to Palestine. So there was a real opportunity to save people, but the Zionists were never, ever interested in that, even at the height of the Nazi persecution. Other than that, about the role of people like ourselves, one thing is to challenge these myths about Zionism being a safe haven for Jews, Zionism being some sort of a liberation movement and so on. It is nothing like that. It is colonialism plus. Because at the heart of Zionism, and I think that this is something very important to mention, is not only about taking over, usurping the land and the resources and all of that, it's also about creating a place for us and only for us. And this type of thinking is inherent to the Zionist project in Palestine. And this type of thinking is something that we really have to challenge. And this type of thinking obviously leads to ethnic cleansing and later on genocide, because these are the only ways to implement a place for us and only for us in a place that is already inhabited by others. So coming from there, or coming from that society and challenging that, and I will end with that, I think that there are two main things that we can do. One is to challenge the narrative as a whole, as we speak here, about what Zionism is, the inherent depravity of it all, the inherent supremacy of it all, that there is absolutely nothing legitimate about Zionism, certainly not in the Zionist project as it was implemented in Palestine. The other thing that is much more difficult, I guess, is to challenge that society that we come from. Because that society that we come from is brainwashed. It is a very sick society, especially that society in Israel and also those who support them. And those people, even if they consider themselves to be liberals and so on, for them it is never about the facts. With people here, we can talk about the facts. For them, it is never about the facts. It is a psychological phenomenon that we're dealing with. So we have to do a lot of psychological work here, and we have to be very consistent about it, and we have to be very unapologetic about it. And then maybe, just maybe, we will be able to change the views of this or that person. But I think that this is kind of the two aspects of work that I think we're all facing.
Thank you, Ronnie. No. Okay. I'm working off a few notes here, so it might not be as smooth as my co-panelists, but I'll do my best. I wanted to add one element to the description, the short description that I provided earlier about myself. I'm also a renounced passport holder of the colonial state of Israel, and that informs my thoughts on the matter, I'd say. All of my family on my mom's side still currently lives there and are extremely Zionist on both sides of the family. And when I see the state, I see it as a symbol of punishing brown people, right? So that's not just Palestinian. That includes the internal hierarchy within Judaism, which starts at white supremacy, and then the umbrella term includes Jewish supremacy. And within our group, meaning Jews, that hierarchy is based not only on where someone is from, and not only their condition of body, but much more concretely, the color of their skin. And growing up in the United States, it's a concept that I am very familiar with, as many other people may well be. You need only look at the cases of Ethiopian Jews, Ugandan Jews that weren't even recognized by the colony, and Yemeni Jews and other Jews, which I resist referring to as Mizrahi, because the term is nonsensical for many reasons we don't have to get into now. But Jews from Arab and Muslim lands, I would say, is more inclusive. And you'll also not get me to say Middle East. We can go with Southwest Asia, North Africa, or some version of that. So at base, I'd like to think what we're doing here, if we're really going to be breaking the change, is working on our responsibility to dismantle that white supremacy and everything that goes along with it. And within that, there is Ashkenazi supremacy, right? Because those are the founders of the country, whether or not they wanted to accept the weakest versions of themselves, right? What do we say about like white supremacy broadly? It's not that you didn't suffer, it's that your skin color isn't what's making you suffer, right? And so if we adapt that to, if we adapt that to this current situation, that's inclusive of Palestinians, even those that may have a certain proximity to whiteness, and as well as Arab Jews and Jews from Muslim lands. And that also ties into the very dangerous idea, which comes from biblical text, and perhaps the most damaging to all of us, Jews and non-Jews alike, because of how it's been weaponized, is the biblical concept of the chosen people, right? Which, in my opinion, is something we need to dispense of completely, just as we dispense of like animal sacrifice. Yeah. Oh, I'm glad we're on the same page. And if you look at the text, and it's brought up in several of the 5 books, we're referred to as chosen despite being a minority, right? Minority means that you're in another land and you're a minority of that land. So if you want to read that, one interpretation could be that we're meant to be diasporic, which I know many of us in the community also believe, which means that the modern formation of the state of Israel sort of negates this concept of being the chosen people because I'll slow down, because we are no longer the minority, we have now become the majority, which is a concept that Israeli government is obsessed with, right? Like superseding the Arab population, and the way that they use Arab obviously doesn't include Jews. And so if they were really reading from the text, and I'm not suggesting that everyone to be Jewish must be reading from the Torah specifically word by word, if they were really sticking to the text, the halacha and all of that, they would see that once we have lost this sense of minority among the majority living within the community, the state of Israel as a concept doesn't apply to the Torah. And there's also another phrase in commentary on the Torah in a section called Pirkei Avot, which basically talks about how one shouldn't separate themselves from the community, right? It depends on how you define community. But if we are the minority, it doesn't necessarily mean that we should separate ourselves from the rest of the group. I believe it's Al tifrosh min hatzibur, literally don't separate yourself from the community. So if we see the world as our larger community, or the countries which we come from, be it Yemen or otherwise, where the Jews lived for 2,000 to 3,000 years with like minimal conflict, there were moments, but overall lived together quite seamlessly, as my grandparents did. We live as a minority among that community, as do Jews in many other countries. And for the most part, besides the horrors in Europe, it worked out. And then, I'm not going to get into the definition of anti-Semitism, but it's definitely a creation of European Jewry that then got transplanted onto Jews that have nothing to do with that history. And now maybe I can talk just a little bit specifically about the Yemeni situation. And the narrative of their arrival, Yemeni and Arab and Muslim Jews alike, is a generationally enforced narrative that we were expelled. And in fact, we were actually manipulated and sometimes even bought to a person. And what's really interesting is that Zionism broke the bonds of our community, right? Ruptured us from our sense of place, which is very similar to what our Palestinian siblings experienced. And I'm in no way comparing the levels of suffering, but the experience is similar. And we both sort of became these sacrificial bricks in the edifice that the Zionist state built. And currently, and previously, Zionists use our historic presence in the land, Swana, as a tool to deny Palestinians their right of return. And it's sort of this tokenization, which is another thing that we should work on as a community. Let's see. Oh, another thing. Sorry, it's a bit scatterbrained, but hope you're still with me. Thank you. Another thing that was taken from us in this manipulated immigration was any sense of connection to the word Arab, because as we all know, in the state of Israel, Arab means enemy, right? So Yemeni Jews, Arab Jews that spoke Arabic, no, we have a new word for that now. It's called Temanit. Any Moroccan Jews that spoke Arabic, no, we don't call it Moroccan Arabic. We call it Marocaite, right? So everything Arab is stripped and denatured because it's considered invaluable and it doesn't fit into the framework of the good immigrant. And just to comment on, I forget who, somebody said before about how Mizrahi Jews from Arab and Muslims lands are maybe the most like zealot-like or the most extreme. You have to consider the context into which they become extreme, and this idea of the good immigrant, which exists in many countries. Now, I don't excuse any kind of zealot-like behavior, but if you look at it in context, the subjugation on immediate arrival, the denial of like good places to live, the prioritization of Ashkenazi immigrants, you can sort of see how one builds the idea that, okay, if I want to benefit from this society, I must be like this. And maybe if I can be a better version of this good immigrant, then I can succeed in the society, which, they don't. That's a false, a goal that will never be achieved. And if you want an example of... So I'll just get to this point and try and close it up, that even within our movement, people are slow to accept the concept of the Arab Jew and reinforce this sort of false dichotomy and political construction. Whereas those communities should be able to easily overlap. I mean, you're looking at one of them, and there's many of you in the crowd today. But the polarizing, okay, thank you. The polarizing narrative is both dismissive and dehumanizing. And those groups are not mutually exclusive. So the Zionists created a system of physical displacement and cultural extraction to make this idea of the good Israeli, which is how the Zionist ideal was manufactured, when in actuality, we should be hand in hand in the struggle with our Palestinian siblings, who we have much more in common with, as they were used for, as Zach mentioned, labor and they were used for labor needs. We were brought in for labor and demographic usurpation of the Palestinians. But in fact, we have much more in common, and we should be fighting Zionism together.
Thank you, Noah. Chaim, last but not least.
Thank you.
You need your microphone, yeah.
You got the message that this panel is not here to please anyone. I hope. So I'm not going to please anyone. I don't want to annoy anyone either. But the question that Hadass asked us is a very difficult one. And the answer is even more difficult than the question. What we need to do is what only we can do. The Palestinians will liberate Palestine. They will decolonize Palestine. As a number of people said today, they don't need us for this. They need our help, but they don't need us for this. They know how to do it, and they are doing it. However, outside of Palestine live a number of Jews, actually more than inside Palestine, and most of those Jews are Zionists. I'll say it again, most of the Jews in the world outside of Palestine are Zionists, and they're still Zionists. After 80 years of terrible suffering of the Palestinians that they are part of inflicting it, they are still Zionists. And I want to come to the problem from another direction altogether, which is actually very disturbing. I'm very happy to be in this panel because nobody was trying to please you. So I will do that as well, in the sense that we heard about a lot of what is wrong with Zionism, and I want to add one, which is its relationship to Judaism. Now, first of all, I want to say that I don't blame anyone, because I am one of the criminals here that keeps saying there is nothing Jewish about genocide, there's nothing Jewish about what they are doing to the Palestinians. I said it tens of times. And I was wrong. And I knew when I said it that I was wrong. What do I mean? And this is the disturbing issue. Well, we heard that the first principle of Zionism actually was taken from the Jewish religion, and that is the chosen people. The chosen people mean the chosen people by God, not by Ben-Gurion. So this comes from the Bible. And the Bible, like any other religious text, is a mixture of the worst and the best, and a lot in the middle. And this is not unique to Zionism. This is not unique to Judaism. It's so true about Christianity, and it's so true about Islam. And I don't have the time to talk about the differences, but they are quite incredible. So I want to say there are two other things that Zionism has taken from the Jewish tradition, but especially from the religion of Judaism. One of them is very European, and that is the Goy. Okay? Read the book, The Goy. Excellent book. And the Goy is not something that was used by Jews in the Arab or Muslim country. This is a very European animal, the Goy. Actually, the Goy is everyone around us. But despite the fact that we Jews are a tiny minority on this earth, and everyone around us is not Jewish, they are the Goy. In other words, they have a single... The fact that they belong to so many countries, so many continents, so many cultures, so many languages means nothing. The main thing is they are not bloody Jewish, are they? So they are the Goy. In other words, the Goy is just one identity which is more important than all other identities for Judaism. So this is another thing coming out of the Bible that we should all be ashamed of. And the last one is, of course, the bloody promised land. We go back to God and his ways. And I'm speaking as someone who grew up in a religious home. Or rather, it wasn't a religious home. I'm correcting this. It was a religious education that I was exposed to. And you know, religious education is very useful. It's a great way of creating critics and radicals, and that's how it worked for me. So those three tenets of Zionism come from Judaism. Zionism was not a religious movement. It was a secular movement. But nonetheless, it took the worst of the Bible and made it its foundation. So when people are saying, and I blame myself for saying this, there is nothing there's nothing Jewish about genocide, and admit it, it's a really good sentence, isn't it? It really gets people clapping. Well, is there nothing about genocide? I hope that somebody here has read the book of Joshua. The book of Joshua is 26 chapters of genocide of 31 towns in Palestine. And actually the text is the same text in every single chapter and is repetitive. The only thing that changes from chapter to chapter is the name of the genocide involved. This is the genocide of the Ai, and this is the genocide of Jericho, and this is the genocide of another town, and so on. 26 towns have been genocided, and in each case, killed the men, the women, the children, the dogs, the horses. All animals should be killed. All houses should be destroyed, burnt. The actual earth should be turned over. Does this remind us something? Do we recognize this description? Have we seen it for 3 years? Well, it comes from the book of Joshua. And from the heavy to the light. Purim. Now, there is a good festival. The children love it. Everyone is having fun. There's nothing wrong about it. You eat Hamantaschen and all that kind of shit. Guys, this is a celebration of, interestingly, the same number of people that the Ministry of Health is saying were killed in Gaza. Look at the book of Esther. 75,000 Persians were killed in 3 days. Of course, the Palestinians were killed in 3 years because, the Jews in Persia were obviously very gifted and they only needed 3 days to kill 75,000 people. But this is the same number we're talking about, and all the children are having fun celebrating this genocide. Of course, they don't read to the end of the book, and they don't know what they're celebrating. And Jews on the whole don't know what they're celebrating. I'm sorry, this is the truth.
Hanukkah.
So, Hanukkah, I could go on, but we only got 8 minutes or something. So I wanted to say that in terms of what we can do and nobody else can do, we can, we should, and we will totally change the nature of Judaism. Because if we don't do that, we are nowhere. And no one can do it but Jews. This is the one thing that no one can do but Jews. And to prove that what I'm saying is possible, I want to tell you at the end who's done it already. Judaism, for 2,000 years, was non-genocidal, non-violent, non-aggressive, neither in Europe, where it could have been more aggressive if it had a chance, but it never had a chance, because it didn't have a chance to defend itself. But even in the Arab world, where there was much more chance of living a full life for Jews, the Jews were not aggressive. So what happens after 2,000 years of this story of non-aggression, of spiritual religiosity that has contributed enormous values to humanity, to the idea of human rights, for example, to the ideals that were never actually put into practice behind the UN, for example. They come from, first and foremost, the Jewish prophets, or the prophets of Judaism, I should say, and the traditions of Jews for 2,000 years. After those 2,000 years, it took few decades for Jews in Palestine to become genociders. And it took few more decades for Jews everywhere that were all those people who are actually abhorring genocide. They were victims of genocide. They never did it to others. So those people that were totally, they were not better than others. The proof is Zionism. But they didn't do it. Give them a chance, give them a country, give them an empire to supply them, and give them the freedom, and we have what we have today. So I want to say that what Zionism has done is occupied the Jewish religion. It changed it. It's converted Jews from people who were not harmful to anyone to people who are harmful to the whole planet, who are the chaos engine of humanity and of the West. And therefore, not having time to develop this, I want to say that the only people that can actually tame and change the type of religion and type of culture that Judaism is us, people like us, everywhere in the Western world. We need to do that in order to save humanity. In order to save humanity. In order to save Palestine, in order to save West Asia, and in order to save Judaism. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to ask something or reply to each other? Each of you can have a couple of minutes if you have to add at this point or not. You seem quite satisfied. I'm going to turn to the audience then.
I can add.
Do you want to
something.
add?
Yeah, just in terms of, to build on what you said, I also think it is the responsibility of Jews to break the cycle, to use the name of the panel, break the chains. But another responsibility that we have is to understand that if we're going to get upset that people conflate Judaism and Zionism. It is our job to do the lifting to separate those two and talk about it amongst ourselves. It is not for us, and this is quite frustrating when I'm in spaces where suddenly the victimization comes back around, which is a Zionist quality, sorry to say. But if you see, and I travel and work a lot on the Arabian Peninsula, so the Gulf and Yemen as well. And often I will hear, spoken in Arabic, which I don't understand completely, but a few words, Jews, Israelis, Zionists, all lumped together, and the term Yehudi is used. Now, for us who are trying to differentiate between those things, the first reaction might be, oh, that's frustrating, and try and explain it to whoever you're speaking to. Or even Palestinians that might use the same term for us. And what I'm asking us to do to move forward is actually put the mirror in front of ourselves and realize if they're conflating those two things, it's because we've made the conflation between those things, and it is up to us, the Jewish community, to show that those two things are different and to lead by example so that the rest of society can see that, okay, they're using the wrong terms. But it is not their burden. It is certainly not the burden of the Palestinians. And so I really want us to take that going forward, that we have to lead by example to separate the two.
Thank you.
I want to reply to what you said because I really liked it. If we Jews want to be able to say there is nothing Jewish about genocide, then let's do something about it, that it'll be justified to say it again. It's not justified to say it now. We totally need to reform the identity because Israel has religionized Zionism. On the one hand, it took over the religion and took its worst parts and used them as spare parts for the Zionist narrative and memes. On the other hand, in the last 2 decades at least, but actually it's longer, they've religionized every area of the secular state, starting, for example, with the bloody army, and it is a bloody army. And this army now is called the Army of the Messiah. Have you heard about this concept? And they have messianized Zionism in a way that we didn't see since the 17th century. And this messianic disease has attacked Judaism 3 important times, and there were a lot of victims as a result. And now they are building messianism again as part of, supposedly integral part of Judaism. All these things are our business. We are saying that we're Jews. And we can't say that we're more Jewish than them. That's not one we can win. What we need to do, and this is the most difficult part of our task, is to change Judaism itself. We changed ourselves already. We have moved away from the bad parts. We now need to change Judaism itself if it is to survive. And we haven't even started talking about it. And this is the most urgent part, I think, of the task, talking about it so that we work out what to do about it.
If I could just react to the point you brought up around how this question that you posed, that there's nothing Jewish about genocide, and your response was, if we dig into Judaism, actually, there's some pretty genocidal stuff. Now, one thing I was thinking just as you were saying that is, in my opinion, the religion of the American Jewish establishment, for example, is not Judaism. It's Israelism. There's nothing Jewish about the ADL. There's nothing Jewish about B'nai B'rith. There's nothing Jewish about most Reform and conservative. Okay, maybe I'm going a little bit farther. But the core tenet of the American Jewish establishment has nothing to do with Judaism. It's not God. You can be an atheist and be the president of Hillel International. You can be an atheist and be the president of the Conference of American Jewish Organizations. You could be the president of any Jewish organization in the United States, in the UK, in Germany, in France, perhaps even Israel, and be a total atheist, because because these are not Jewish institutions. In fact, the founder, the president of the deputy of the board of British Jews, his name is Philip Rosenberg. And, you can find him taking photos with Israeli, there's no such thing as an innocent Palestinian in Gaza, Isaac Herzog. And he told me multiple times, back when I knew him many years ago, that he was an avowed atheist. So there's nothing, so you can be an atheist. By the way, you can also believe the Torah, the book of Joshua. You could claim the book of Joshua is unrelated to my life. I don't have to celebrate any holidays. I don't have to adopt Jewish principles, right? I don't have to save pikuach nefesh, saving a life, or doing a good deed, or removing a stumbling block before the blind. No Jewish principle is relevant to any Jewish organizations today. They're all revolving around a single uniting principle, which is that there is a single force for good in the world, and that's Israel. And it's our job as Jews to defend it and protect it and whitewash its crimes. And that's what unites Jewish institutions across the world.
Yes. I think that's what unites them today, basically. I mean, as Chaim said, rightly so, Zionism has managed to basically reinvent or transform Judaism from whatever it was in the past to something that is of base nationalism, supremacy, militarism, all the rest. And as Leibovich said, one of the greatest scholars in so-called Israel, who was also a religious person, he said that he is afraid about the future of the Jewish people because the Jewish people, after the foundation of the Zionist state, has lost its content, and the only content that remains for them is fascism. His words. Nationalism and fascism. And this is exactly what has come out of this new transformation or whatever of Jewish religion. Now, I'm not here to defend Judaism, but just about any religion and also about Judaism, certain things can be interpreted in different ways. For example, chosen people. Again, I'm not here to defend it. I'm just saying that it is open for interpretation. You can interpret it in the supremacist way, that we are better than others, we are more worthy of the others, etc. You can also interpret it in the way of chosen in the sense of tikkun olam, fixing the world, being handed the word of God, etc. Promised land, you can also interpret it in a religious way which has nothing to do with nationalism. There is no concept of nationalism in Judaism. So all of these things have been... Zionism has taken the most racist, perverse, supremacist, etc. interpretation that you can have of Judaism, and they made it into their version of Judaism. Unfortunately, and partly because of our not fighting back, I would say, they have done it very successfully, and they have convinced the world, they have convinced people who consider themselves to be Jewish that this is Judaism. So we have to fight back. I agree.
And that's...
The question is, can we do what Zionism has done? Zionism has occupied Palestine, occupied Syria, Lebanon, etc., but mainly occupied the West, occupied the Christian leaders, occupied the political leaders, and most importantly, occupied the Jewish minds across the world, yeah? It occupied the religion, it occupied everything. Now, if it was possible for it to do it, is it not possible for us to do the opposite? That's my question.
Thank you, Chaim. So, let's see who wants to have a question.
Hello, testing. Actually, I'm going to use my mic privilege to ask the first question.
You're allowed.
Sorry, everyone. You've all talked about changing Judaism, which I fully agree with, and I think everyone in the room is with you on. But in the meantime, though, I think we have another separate mission, which is while we work to change Judaism and institutional Judaism, we have to fight institutional Judaism. We have to fight them we have to fight the ADL. We have to fight the British Council of Jews. We have to fight the weaponization of Judaism in the aid of what has been done to Palestinians. And I'd like some thoughts on how we can effectively do that.
Yeah, thanks. That's the first question. I'm collecting a few, and you guys can take notes and decide how to reply to it. Of course, we have to be short. That's always the game. So first of all, I would like to go to the person here. I would really, really request to just ask one sentence of a question. Just a second. I'm going to say who is next. Here, please. And I'm sorry that I didn't see who was first, but we're going to have to be very... You. And I'm going to tell you in a second, okay? Please begin.
Okay. No, I just wanted to comment on these two biblical notions that were raised of the chosen people and the promised land. I'm not a rabbi, but I have heard a different rabbinical interpretation of these verses from the Torah. We were, as Jews, we were indeed chosen by God. I'm addressing myself to those who believe in God, but even the secular Jews who are atheists could take in this argument politically as anti-Zionists. We were chosen, but not to have any particular privilege over others. We were chosen to fulfill God's will. What is God's will? It's to perform the mitzvah, His commandments. There are 613 of them. What? Oh, okay, go ahead.
What was the question?
So much for the synagogue.
The rest for the synagogue. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jacob, for doing a great job. You were next, I think. Please. I'm sorry not being able to collect from everybody, but Jacob is going to steal your microphone if you're too long, so pay attention. Please.
But doesn't it go even deeper than that into the really right to the heart of the matter, which is the nature of God, even the existence of God? Because you can take two interpretations. One is that of the Roman emperors who imposed monotheism on the Roman Empire to stop it fragmenting. And from that you then get that all civil rulers do so with permission of God. They're appointed by God, and therefore you may not challenge the people who have power because their power has come from God. So you have that side of Judaism, which Chaim very ably then interpreted the genocidal thing. Then on the other hand, you have the other Jewish concept that God is not physical but spiritual, and there's only one spirit, and that therefore the universe is unified. It is a system of unified laws, and that takes you down to the great Spinoza, of whom Hegel said that nobody is a philosopher who hasn't read Spinoza. And so what we have inherited is a hodgepodge of different ideas which require either interpreting or being filtered to get rid of the rubbish and come out with what is good and useful.
Thank you.
Where's the question? Again.
Maybe there isn't. Here, the woman here at the front with the glasses.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello. I have a short question to Chaim. You were talking about Messianism.
A bit close to the microphone.
You were, Chaim, you were talking about Messianism. Do you, in that context, do you want to say something about Christian Messianism, Christian Zionism? In my country, this is a huge problem. They're the sturdiest supporters of Israel.
Thank you. We have here Yuval.
Quick. First, I will humbly disagree that Zionism occupied the West. I think like it was a creation of the West. One came before, and it's a continuation of settler colonialism. My question is, I think you said really important words here at the same time as I'm trying to imagine how I communicate with an 18-year-old. Because in the end of the day, the people that we see on the street and the people who are, you know, with the signs of Jewish bloc against genocide are young people. And I'm not going to necessarily start to talk with them about whether is a God in Judaism or not. how do we translate that to young people? Not only for them, of course, to not go and be swallowed by Zionism, but also to not go and be swallowed by liberal Zionism. Because for me and I imagine a lot of people here, that until we got to anti-Zionism, until we got to understand, oh, what is resistance? How can I, there are a lot of these steps of liberal Zionism that we are tapping in and then leaving behind. So if we want to end the genocide as fast as possible, how do we translate what you're saying?
Young children?
Exactly.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm going to have one more question from the man with the red hat there. Thank you. And then your way to reply is to close up also your last sentence, and we're going to close it up.
I don't mind what religious beliefs people have, but I'm a firm believer, and this applies to Ireland, in the separation between what we call church and state, and the application of human rights, equal human rights for all people. So I'd like to maybe cut through this, that maybe that's a better way of approaching this problem that we should be calling, and particularly since the Second World War. I mean, that was the whole idea, and we heard it talked about this morning, the idea that never again, and that people would have equal human rights. Hasn't happened, obviously. It certainly hasn't happened in Palestine. So that's my question. Could we approach this in a different way of just arguing for equal human rights?
Thank you.
People can believe whatever they want to.
Thank you so much. So we're going to do the round again. I think we will start the other way around now. Ronnie, a few words and close up, and then Zach, Chaim, and then Noah, okay? Try to be short, 2 minutes each.
I'm going to start with a one sentence answer, and that is about God. Let's talk about God. Why not? Another thing that's open for interpretation. For me, God is love, truth, equality, infinity, whatever. All of these things, nature, all of these things that are beyond my perception, things that I aspire for. For Zionism, as Chaim, I think, mentioned, they have Godified the state. They made the state into the God, nationalism into the God. And they have taken whatever was of Judaism, whatever holy and lofty ideas, they made it into this base, as I said, nationalism and fascism. And about separation of state and religion, that ties in direct into that. And the same Leibovich that I mentioned before, he insisted, as a religious Jew, he insisted on separation of state and religion. And he had a bit of fight with Ben-Gurion at the time about that. Ben-Gurion told him, I'll spare you the whole story, Ben-Gurion told him about the separation of state and religion. He said, I want the state of Israel to hold Jewish religion in its hands. And he told him, Leibovich told him, and I want the religion of Israel to be relieved of your hold. And this is the battle that exists. It existed in the past. There is a century-long struggle. Since the establishment of Zionism, there's also the struggle, the Jewish struggle against Zionism. And there is this tension and there is this struggle. Unfortunately, we see less of this struggle happening these days. It is encouraging to see people here of Jewish descent, the largest growing, I think, Jewish community in the US is Jewish Voice for Peace, and kudos to them, and they are clearly, explicitly anti-Zionist. So this is encouraging. People who come from Zionist background, Zionist homes, and then work against that, overcome that. This is encouraging. It's not enough, but it is encouraging nonetheless. But when we don't have time to go into it right now, but when we talk about Judaism and the whole thing, again, as I mentioned before, there is this whole thing about the perception, the facts versus the psychology. Also in this case, there is always the facts versus the perception of it. And we have to challenge both. So both are interesting, both are important, and both are long educational processes, but I think that the most important thing is that we have to be very clear and uncompromising in our stance when we stand up to Zionism and not try to kind of, legitimize things that Zionism does in the name of Judaism.
There was a question. Just go in this order, yeah?
Yes, thank you.
There was a question around how do we combat institutional Judaism? Well, I would say the way to combat institutional Zionism is with institutional anti-Zionism. And I think there's such a focus on attacking the existing Zionist institutions, we all know which ones I'm talking about, rather than building new ones. And I'm as guilty as anyone, but we need to build anti-Zionist Jewish synagogues and anti-Zionist Jewish congresses and anti-Zionist Jewish lobbying organizations and anti-Zionist Jewish social movements, anti-Zionist Jewish political parties. We need to build. The Zionist movement built all of those things, and it took them 100 years. And it may take us that long, but I hope it takes a lot less. But we need to build all of those equivalent institutions, and we need to stop cannibalizing people who agree with us on 99.6% of things and disagree with us on 0.4% of things. So we need to build alliances, and we across traditional party and partisan divides. I do think it does involve requiring bringing people in we may not be entirely comfortable with, but I do think the bigger the tent, the better, because we have an uphill battle, and we're fighting the most powerful, the wealthiest, the strongest, the most militarized countries in the world.
I want to say that it's a great panel. I love all my co-panelists, so I agree with what they say because they're so accurate. And the question I want to answer is the one that my good friend started already to answer, and that is the question of God. Now, the Jewish God, I'm a Marxist, an atheist Marxist, that reads the Bible every few years. And it gives me a lot, it really contributes to my understanding. And what is God? What is any God? The Jewish God, let's start with the Jewish God, is terrifying. It is a very nasty God. Let's be open about it. In Hebrew, God is called Elohim Tzvaot. That means the God of the army. It normally translated as the God of the hosts, but actually it's in Hebrew the God of the armies. And actually what and Ronnie mentioned that basically the God of Judaism is now the state, but more than the state, the army. The army was deified. Instead of the deity, the army became the God. Now, actually, it's not such a strange thing, because the Jewish God is very, very nasty, is very dangerous, is very hostile to most people, and spends his time, of course, complaining about the Jews. Actually has less time for the goys, but he complains about the Jews in every single sentence that he's saying. Now let's hear about those Jews. Those Jews never do what I ask them to do. They go and, believe other gods but me. They don't listen to what I'm saying. And when they listen, they don't do what I tell them to do. And I could go on about it. Now read the Bible. So this God is very unpleasant. So let's go back to what a God is. A God is the creation of a culture. Each culture creates its own God in its own image. It's not God that created Adam in his own image. It is Adam that created his God in his own image. And Judaism has created a monster of a God, and now it has a monster of a God in the IDF. So we can talk about this for a long time, and there is no time for it, but I want to say that this is one of the things we need to sort out. Because if we don't sort it out, this is at the heart of the Jewish tradition. There is a vengeful God, a God that doesn't listen to people. Remember how long Abraham has to argue with God so he doesn't kill everyone in Sodom and Gomorrah. Yeah, I mean, God immediately wants to kill everyone. And Abraham said, you know, maybe if there are 50 just men, God said, no, there aren't. Okay, 30, you know, will you still do it? Okay, I won't do it. Okay, if there are, you know, he's haggling and hustling, but basically, he's trying to take the temperature of God down. This is the God of Judaism. There is no way of running away from it. And we need to change that God to represent anti-Zionism.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Thank
In other
you,
words,
Chaim.
humanity. Humanity.
No, you have the last word.
Okay, I'm going to do my best to answer all the questions and then tie it up. So here we go. My work in journalism, as a photographer, as an author, all of these things, and in previous jobs in which I did completely different stuff, I never introduced myself as, hi, no, I'm Jewish, because that's weird, right? And I don't expect any of my colleagues to be like, hi, I'm Stephen, I'm Buddhist. Okay, this is obviously strange, right? They should not be our characteristic that we lead with. However, since October 23, and I absolutely hate using that as a benchmark, right? Because it's the benchmark that the world gave us because cruelty and genocide occurred far before that. For whatever reason, my voice was elevated because I'm Jewish, because I am a former citizen of the colony. And that is a perfect example of Jewish supremacy, right? Why is my voice elevated in the media? Why am I a good representative of anti-Zionism, of the movement for free Palestine, rather? It's because I'm an anti-Zionist Jew. It's an anti-Zionist former citizen of the colony, right? So I think that we need to break down that concept within ourselves, that why do we need my privileged voice rather than getting it directly out of the mouths of the people that are being genocided, right? Okay. So I'll quickly go through the, thanks. I'll quickly go through the questions.
You don't have to answer everything.
It's really quick, I swear.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the question about like the rabbinic nature of the chosen people and how, in fact, we were chosen to fulfill God's mitzvot, I would say that this too is a dangerous kind of supremacy, because why should we be deemed the ones to uphold a morality, right? And that's a dangerous concept. Like, why do we have a morality above any others? So that's my thoughts on that question, briefly. And instead, we should seek to be a humble community, a minority within society, but not better in any way, working together to support the human rights of our siblings in their own fight for liberation. And in that way, if you want to look at it, okay, chosen, but it's really important, the minority aspect. We are not a large group of people, and we need to work with the communities around us, in collaboration with the communities around us, if we want to achieve liberation for Palestinians or for any other group. And lastly, the question was, how do we fight? So I want to emphasize the word fight quite literally. About a month ago, I saw Israeli soldiers shooting point blank at the people in front of me, comrades on the flotilla, that were shot meters away. It is a fight. It is a brutal fight. We are dealing with a violent, indoctrinated, brainwashed society that I'm, without doing too much pat on the back, so proud of us all for fighting against, because it is scary, especially when you face them face to face, which many of the people, all the people here have been in the colony and certainly have. So what I suggest, oh shit, sorry. Sorry, can I just use your mic? This is just falling apart. I really lost steam on that last question, sorry. So what I suggest is that you start where you are.
But put it close.
No? Yes? Better?
Yes.
Okay. You start where you are. Whatever your position is, from dock worker to journalist to teacher to football coach, whatever, you find a way to decolonialize, be anti-colonial, which includes liberation of Palestine, which includes liberation for so many groups of people, all the most marginalized, queer people, everybody is in that group, and you fight for them. You put whatever privilege that you have and you put your body in front of those with less. In this particular case, we support our Palestinian siblings. That means reading their books, buying their artwork, sending money if we can, talking about Palestine constantly. So in that way, this is the way that we move forward. And if you're one for direct action, great, even better. We need more of that. I'm not going to give advice on that right now, because
But in
people
your
are being
workshop.
put in jail. People are being put in jail for that. But come to the workshop. We'll talk more about that. So
Yes.
I hope everyone can participate.
Thank you so much, everybody. Before we leave, round of applause to this amazing panel, please. Thank you so much. Before you leave, thank you. Before you leave for dinner, this is the QR code I promised you. While you scan it, there is an announcement from someone here. Please go ahead.
Hi everyone, my name is Ivan, I'm from Argentina. I'm from Judíos for Palestina, Jews for Palestine from Argentina. And I'm part of the delegation of Global Jews for Palestine, and I wanted to invite you all, if you're part of a Jewish anti-Zionist collective or if you're a Jewish anti-Zionist activist, we're getting together tomorrow for dinner. We're going to have dinner real close by here at Saravana Bhavan. That's an Indian vegetarian food. That is Unit 1118, Belgar Square, here, Tallaght, Dublin. So in case you have any questions or if you want to meet us, we have a stand there and you can look for our flag. Thank you.
We meet back here at 7:45 today for a very special event. See you.